let me first say that I'm glad satisfied of the way our seminar is proceeding. I think we succeeded at least in one thing, that is to say, in establishing a kind of friendly Stimmung, as the Germans say. And I think that philosophy is something that can have its proper place only among friends. So, I thank you for that, at least. Thank you. Before going on with genealogy of monasticism, I'd just like to go back to the question of subjectivity, for just adding two little glosses. One, which comes from a conversation we had this morning with one of you who is a musician. Yeah, I was always stuck. Why in the monastery music plays such an important role? Music is really center, and monasticism is the place where also liturgical music was created. And the monk sang all day, continuously. The prayer as the form of a chant or of a cantillatio. So, the idea that your friend suggested that this can perhaps have to do with the project of forming a form of life. And that perhaps music is the proper way to grasp or to try to organize a form of life. This is true also on a very empirical level, because in the monastic literature we have texts that suggest that the singing is a way of measuring and organized time. In a moment in which, as we saw, clocks were not so perfect, no? Singing, the organization of the monastic chant was also a way of measuring and organized time. So one of the way of this spiritualization of time that we saw be at the center of monastic life. And this reminds me also, there is a book by the French philosopher Philippe Lacoue-labarthe called La Mélodie Obsessive, the obsessive melody, in which he suggests that perhaps the only way to express a subjectivity is a melody. And then there is this idea of an obsessive melody going on, etc. So I think that so it's not here the place to do it. But your observation, I think, was pertinent. Another thing I would add before going on is that if I had to state which is the difference of my way of posing the problem of subjectivity compared with respect to the one of Foucault, from which I learned a lot, of course, is that Foucault is interested in the process of subjectivation. And I am more interested in what I would call the process of desubjectivation. So now let's go back to our monks. Yeah, as to the problem we saw yesterday of the juridical or non-juridical character of the monastic rule and the monastic professions, and there is one interesting text on this question, which comes from a Spanish scholasticist, one perhaps the greatest personality in late scholasticism, Suarez. He has a book on the vow. Voto. And so it's a long analysis of the structure of the vow. But what interests me is particularly a moment in which he makes a distinction between the way a vow functions and a juridical obligation. So he will say, I quote, "The vow, insofar as it is the obligation through which someone links himself spontaneously to God, does not oblige as the law simply to accomplish certain determined actions and to abstain from others, but rather produces in the will vinculum permanens et quasi in actu, a kind of vinculum, can you say? Link, obligation, a permanent obligation and almost an habit." So, the vow produces an habit, and all the meaning we saw. And then he adds, this is why the vow has as its object the vow itself. So, in a way, it's void. So the obligation of the vow has no precise object. I'm not obliged to do this or that. The vow has as its object, can you say like that? The vow itself. Habet pro obiecto votum. Has as an object the vow. Because there is no, the main thing is not the obligation to do this or that, but again, the obligation to produce an habit. That is to say, a form of life. So the vow engaged, it's an obligation to produce an habit and a form of life. This is philosophically very interesting because we have a link, an obligation, something which has the form of obligation, is a profession of vow, but this obligation is void, empty. And it refers it to itself. It's an obligation to the obligation in its formulation. It reminds a little Kantian idea of the form of laws. It is the imperative, the categoric moral imperative in Kant is void, is empty. It does not prescribe this or that. It cannot prescribe this or that. So while, for instance, we saw in the pagan devotio that the devotus devotes himself to the gods, and then it, so to speak, gives its body to the infernal gods. Here, in the vow, in the Christian vow, we have only the production of an habitus, of a form of life. So what the Christian devote, can one say devote? Devotus? No, Christian. The object of his vow is a form of life. And here again, we see, I think, this indetermination between rule and life, law and life. Another thing I forgot to tell you. I think that today we'll have a shorter seminar because I have to